I'm Home is track 6 on What's Your Superpower. A lot of you guys requested this one in the chat. A lot of you guys said this is your favorite track on the album, so that's why I'm going over it. This one almost didn't make the cut, but it did. Shout out to the collaborators on it. Ayo Nick played some crazy keys on it. He actually started the idea for what the hook became, so he played a lot of the real gospel stuff. Kyla came in with the killer horns and really stacked it up. And then Torin came in with the swells and everything, and Kyla did vocals on it, and I actually sing on it too. It just came together. So me, Kyla, Torin, Ayo Nick. So 4 minds coming together. It has 137 tracks. So this is the session. Here's all the tracks. And there's a lot of groups, so let's open up these groups just to give you guys a sense of how many tracks are in here. So the name of the track is I'm Home on What's Your Superpower. The name of the session is One Step at a Time. And I ended up changing the name of the track at the last minute. And literally right before I uploaded the album, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna call this I'm Home because the feeling is like you haven't seen your family in a long time. And then it's like that feeling you see your family for the first time. I'm home. Here I am. I'm here. So that's the feeling that I wanted to portray in the song. That's how it made me feel. I don't even know how to begin because there's so many tracks. So let's begin with what I did. It looks like I separated the DECAP section. So this is like the basic part. The kick is called Back to School Kick. I think that's on Drums That Knock Volume 8. I did all the drums in the arrangement view. I didn't do any drum rack or anything. I just placed it on the grid. So Back to School Kick. I put a transient master on it and just killed some of the sustain. So without it, I like the tonality of the kick, but it had that extra sound at the end, which didn't fit this track. You know why? Because on this session, I think originally I added some reverb or something like that. So I tried cutting that back, and putting transient master just kind of cut that sound down. So before and after. Just a little bit tighter. Then after that, Isotope Trash, I just did some distortion on it, just wave shaping. So before, after. Made it hit a little bit harder. So that's it on the kick. Then the snare. I don't think this is in any of the Drums and Knock kits. This is something that I made. It's a rim shot that I created from scratch, and I ran it through the SP12 drum machine. The SP12 is an old school drum machine that was made in the 80s, made popular by like Pete Rock. I think Marley Marl used it, if I'm not mistaken. You know, I think even Primo messed with it for a little bit. The SP gives sounds a real grit. I ran a lot of my 808s through it. And then the bass. This is one of my unreleased 808s. And this is one of the synth lines. I played this in Purity. Chords, chord stabs. And then another synth stab. This pluck was Omnisphere, even though it says Purity. Another synth to stack it up. I'll show you these individually. So there's this one. This one. A lot of processing on those sounds for sure. I don't actually have the originals because I had to freeze it all together. Then after that, I took those chords and I used Spitfire Labs and I made an arpeggio out of it. So these are the chords. And then the arpeggio. And then everything together. I used another instance of Spitfire for the strings. Shakers. And so all together. Once I had this general part of the beat, I sent it over to Ayo Nick, and he sent me back some crazy keys. These are the keys he sent back. Then together with my section, so after that, I sent it over to Torin. He was doing a lot of work with Kyla in that moment. So Kyla ended up playing on a bunch of tracks on the album. Crazy horn player. She was on the stream. Everyone was on the stream. Ayo, Nick, Torin, Kyla. She added like, I don't know, 60 tracks of horns or more. So these are the horns that she added. I will show you guys the whole group. I won't play you guys the individual stems. It'll take all day. On the horns, there's a lot of processing. It doesn't need any processing because it sounds crazy. I just did some processing to get it to sound cohesive with this record. So I did some compression with the glue, some OTT, automated some reverb, some more EQ, added some hybrid reverb, and then the individual groups have some of their own processing. They sound great even without any effects. Bringing real instruments into your production can really give it a lot more dimension. And then Kyla also gave me a vocal track. I have a bunch of Kyla vocals in here too. Let's hear the horns with the vocals. And then at the end of the track, Kyla did another vocal solo section. So I took some of my favorite lines that she sang and spliced them together. And I'm singing on the outro too. Here's my vocals. I'm gonna play mine and Kyla's. The way I did that was I only sang that line once, and then I ran it through Melodyne so I could create my own harmonies. Because I'm not necessarily a singer. I sang what sounded good to me because I know melody. And then I took the other two layers and I created harmonies out of Melodyne, all together. The outro, strings, piano arp. I added Reese bass with Silent. One thing I do with those really beautiful outros, I like to add effects and different textures. So I went into Drums That Knock Volume 8, and I got some textured percussion that I played with some of the instruments here. It almost sounds like very clean vinyl crackle, but it's real sounds. And then Torin gave me a bunch of ear candy. So like for the intro, guitar, woo, fire. I love that guitar. Guitar swells. And then all together. And I think what really glued it together for me, I added some Reese bass. So good. And then the outro. There it is, y'all. That is how the music came together for I'm Home. I mixed and mastered it. 137 tracks is no easy task to mix and master, especially in Ableton. Show you guys what I did on the master channel. The first plugin is FabFilter Pro Q3. Very simple. I did a cut at about 33 hertz. just a low cut. I did a little bit of a low cut, less than a decibel at about 100 hertz, just to get rid of some of the boominess. And one trick I learned is when you're doing a cut somewhere, it's not a bad idea to do a wide boost after it. I did a cut here, and then I did a very wide boost with the peak at about 3.6 hertz. And of course, on the master, I did it in linear phase mode, which I always do with EQ on the master. After that, I have a Gullfoss with the recover set to 23 and the tame set to 23. I didn't do anything with the bias on this one because sometimes it sounds better when you don't. After that, I have a Saturator. I didn't do a whole lot, except I set the dry wet to 50%. I have it set to soft sine, and I set the bass a little bit higher than the default at 0. So I set the bass to 5. All this is very minor, very small adjustments. So that's without it. And then with it. It's so subtle, but just adding these subtle things to your track can really beef it up. After that, glue. It's like hitting less than a decibel of gain reduction. So just taming some of the peaks. I always do on the master, very fast release, medium attack. I'm not soft clipping. You can see it's going in the red, but there's a reason for that. I'll tell you guys why in a second. So soft clipping is off on everything so far. So there's no soft clip on the Saturator, no soft clip on the glue, because Ableton internally is 32-bit. So even if you clip a plugin, it doesn't clip the audio. I'll show you why later. I'm boosting the makeup just to give it a little more gain, going into newfangled Saturator, which is what I'm using as my clipper for this track. It's clipping out of the glue and clipping into Saturate, and I'm driving it 1.5 decibels. I have the clipper shape set to 20% and detail about 50%. Without it, now it's going into the Pro L, so there's less of that clip sound. With it, it's just clipping it before it hits the limiter. So usually I like to clip before I hit the limiter. And then there's the Pro L2, which is last in the chain. I'm dithering at 24 bits, no gain at all. So literally it's going into it and it's not really doing anything at all. But the reason why I put a Pro L2 at the end is because I want to dither without dithering in Ableton. I'm just dithering at 24 bits for the last stage in the mastering process. And then at the end of the chain, the very last thing I did was I set the true peak output of Pro L2 to -2 true peak. The reason being is because the track is louder than -14 LUFS, and Spotify recommends that if you're mastering louder than -14, you want to set the true peak to -2 because of the encoding with OGG files and all that kind of stuff. If you have to encode to OGG or MP3, it could clip when you do that. That's it. That is how I did I'm Home on What's Your Superpower.